not serious Jewish community. The Syrian, not a Syrian, Syrian. They say Syrian. But again, it's these limited guys, that's all. Turn it off already. They know the music. Now, did the Cambridge police act stupidly, as Obama said, or did Obama act stupidly, and did Henry Gates Jr. or whatever cause it? On the above time and date, I was on uniform duty in an unmarked police cruiser assigned to the administration section working from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Approximately 12:44 p.m., I was operating my cruiser on Harvard Street near Ware Street. This is the police report. At that time, I overheard an ECC broadcast for possible break-in in progress at Ware Street. Due to my proximity, I responded. When I arrived at 10 Ware Street, I radioed ECC and asked if they have the caller meet me at the front door of the residence. I was told that the caller was already outside. As I was getting this info, I climbed the porch stairs toward the front door. As I reached the door, a female voice called out to me. I turned and looked in the direction of the voice and observed a white female, later identified as Lucia Whalen. Whalen, who was standing on the sidewalk in front of the residence, held a wireless telephone in her hand, told me that it was she who called. She went on to tell me that she observed what appeared to be two black males with backpacks on the porch of Ware Street. She told me that her suspicions were aroused when she observed one of the men wedging his shoulder into the door as if he was trying to force entry. Now, let's pause right here. I believe that Al Sharpton could bring a lawsuit through some degenerate lawyer against the neighbor. Because just because she saw two black men wedging their shoulders into a door didn't mean they were breaking in. This was racial profiling on the part of the neighbor. So if I were Henry Louis Gates Jr., I would sue the neighbor. I would sue Cambridge. I'd sue God for even making white people. Because if there were no white people, there'd be no racism. And then there'd be no Henry Louis Gates Jr. as a professor. He wouldn't have gotten where he is, since it was only white liberals who put him there. So then the police report goes on. As I turned and faced the door, I could see an older black male standing in the foyer of Ware Street. I used to say foyer when I lived in the Bronx. But then when I moved to California, I had to say foyer. I had to upgrade my lingo. To me, it's still foyer. I saw an older black male standing in the foyer of Ware Street. I made this observation through the glass-paned front door. Very high class in Boston. And I go Cambridge. Real granny house. Queen Anne front, Mary Ann behind. As I stood in plain view of this man, later identified as Gates, I asked if he would step out onto the porch and speak with me. He replied, "No, I will not." He then demanded to know who I was. I told him I was Sergeant Crowley from the Cambridge Police, and I was investigating a report of a break in progress at the residence. As I was making this statement, Gates opened the front door and exclaimed, "Why? Because I'm a talc man in America?" Is that a correct word, talc man? What's TALC? Somebody must have typed this wrong. Black man in America. Someone typed it wrong. I then asked Gates if there was anyone else in the residence. While yelling, he told me that it was none of my business and accused me of being a racist police officer. So let's stop right there. Right off the bat, right out of the gate, Gates is the troublemaker and the racist. The minute you scream racism at a cop when he's only doing his job, he called you're the racist. I assured Gates that I was responding to a citizen's call to the Cambridge Police, and the caller was outside as he spoke. Gates seemed to have only picked up a cordless telephone and dialed an unknown telephone number. As he did so, I radioed on Channel 1 that I was off in the residence with someone who appeared to be a resident but very uncooperative. I then overheard Gates asking the person the other end of the telephone call to get the chief. And what's the chief's number? Gates was telling the person on the other of the call that he was dealing with a racist police officer in his house. Gates then turned to me and told me that I had no idea who I was messing with, and that I had not heard the last of it. Oh, you ain't kidding. While I was led to believe that Gates was lawfully in the residence, I was quite surprised and confused with the behavior he exhibited toward me. I asked Gates to provide me with photo ID so that I could verify that he resided at Ware Street, and so that I could radio my findings to ECC. Gates initially refused, demanding that I show him ID and then did supply me with a Harvard University ID card. Upon learning that Gates was affiliated with Harvard, I radioed and requested the presence of the Harvard University Police. Let's pause right here. Gates says to him, "You show me your ID card." In other words, Gates was being a pain in the butt. Gates was being aggressive. Gates was challenging the cop in a way he shouldn't have challenged him. The cop was only doing his job. Gates is a troublemaking guy who got where he is by doing this all his life, and he suddenly wasn't going to change spots because a cop caught him breaking into his own house. That's all. He's being himself, in other words. I'll go on. That was an editorial. With the Harvard University ID in hand, I radioed my findings to ECC on Channel 2 and prepared to leave. Now, the cop is leaving now. Gates again asked for my name, which I began to provide. Gates began to yell over my spoken words by accusing me of being a racist police officer and leveling threats that he wasn't someone to mess with. Oh, hey, You don't know who I am. See, the whole thing here is that Gates was pissed off that the cop didn't know who he was. Everyone should know who he is. You know, after all, he's a distinguished professor of Afro-American studies. Why, when he walks down the street, the pavement itself should part for him. Everybody in Cambridge knows me. Who are you, you little cracker? You don't know who I am, you illiterate white trash, you? I am Henry Louis Gates, Jr. I am a distinguished professor of everything in the world, and you don't know me, you little twerp? See, that's the undertone here. He was pissed that they didn't know who he was. At some point during this exchange, I became aware that Officer Carlos Figueroa was standing behind me. When Gates asked a third time for my name, I explained to him that I had provided it as a request 2 separate times. Gates continued to yell at me. I told Gates that I was leaving his residence and that if he had any other questions regarding the matter, I would speak with him outside of the residence. As I began walking through the foyer toward the front door, I could hear Gates again demanding my name, again told Gates that I would speak with him outside. My reason for wanting to leave the residence was that Gates was yelling very loud, and the acoustics of the kitchen and foyer were making it difficult for me to transmit pertinent information to ECC or other responding units. His reply was, yeah, I'll speak with your mama outside. Very high class. That's really high class, Gates. Is that what you teach your students? Is that in African American studies, to tell everyone I'll see your mama outside? When I left the residence, I noted that there were several Cambridge and Harvard University police officers assembled on the sidewalk in front of the residence. Additionally, the caller, Mrs. Watton, and at least 7 unidentified passersby were looking in the direction of Gates, who had followed me outside the residence. As I descended the stairs to the sidewalk, Gates continued to yell at me, accusing me of racial bias, and continued to tell me that I had not heard the last of him. Due to the tumultuous manner Gates had exhibited in his residence, as well as the continued tumultuous behavior outside the residence view of the public, I warned Gates that he was becoming disorderly. Gates ignored my warning and continued to yell, which drew the attention of both the police officers and citizens, who appeared surprised and alarmed by Gates' outburst. For a second time, I warned Gates to calm down while I withdrew my department-issued handcuffs from their carrying case. Gates again ignored my warning and continued to yell at me. It was at this time that I informed Gates that he was under arrest. I then stepped up to the stairs onto the porch and attempted to place handcuffs on Gates. Gates initially resisted my attempt to handcuff him, yelling that he was disabled and would fall without his cane. Oh, suddenly he was disabled. Another racket, by the way. You ever see the blue cards where they jump out and they see you looking at them, suddenly they grab the cane? When you're not looking, they spring into the restaurant. You have to drive around the corner. You ever see the people with the blue cards? This is not a racial thing. This is a fake handicap thing. This guy's got everything covered to Monday. He's got the race racket. He's got the handicap. Now suddenly he's handicapped. When he's shooting his mouth off, he wasn't handicapped. Now they got the handcuffs. Oh, I'm going to fall, and I got the cane. He was disabled, and he would fall without his cane. After the handcuffs were properly applied, Gates complained that they were too tight. Oh, come on. I then ordered Officer whatever, who was among them, to handcuff Gates with his arms in front of him for his comfort, while I secured a cane for Gates from within the residence. I then asked Gates if he would like an officer to take possession of his house key and secure his front door, which he left wide open. Gates told me that the door was unsecurable due to a previous break attempt at the residence. You hear this? So in other words, he's admitting there was a previous break-in attempt. The cop was protecting him because they knew there was a previous break-in from the police blotter. Shortly thereafter, a Harvard University maintenance person arrived and appeared familiar with Gates. I asked Gates if he was comfortable with this Harvard University maintenance person securing his residence. He told me that he was. Oh, it's a university housing on top of it all. In addition to the big salary, they get a nice old Queen Anne home. On top of it all, another freebie worth about $1 million a year, $300,000 a year. After a brief consultation with V. Lashley, and upon Gates' request, he was transported to the street police in a police cruiser, where he was booked and processed. I report, you decide. I'll be right back.
On the air, online, and on the go, this is Talk 910 KNEW.
All day long I'd biddy bum if I were a wealthy man.
Okay. Turn it off already, will you? They know we're talking 2 topics, the organs and the Obama as racist promoter of intercommunity tension. I mean, the president is a promoter of intercommunity tension by calling the white cop who, as far as I could tell, was doing his job. Apparently, Gates' house was broken into before, so there was a call about a break-in. He shows up, and instead of being a gentleman about it, Gates provokes the cop by calling him names and not cooperating. You know, because he's God after us. I made a fortune bringing in organs. Are you kidding? Oh, I made a fortune with your father bringing in organs from Cuba with the molasses. While you were a cheerleader, I was making a bundle on the organs. Are you kidding me? Now, Las Vegas, Jeff, you're on the Savage Nation. Go ahead, please.
Well, the guy that just called in is retarded. I am a nurse, and to sell an organ, you cannot do it. It's against the law. It's unethical. I'm also an atheist, and I know that's unethical. You can't sell organs. You can't sell limbs. You can't sell blood. You have to give that stuff away. It's called humanity.
I understand that. It has nothing to do with atheism. It has to do with humanity, is right?
It's just humanity.
It has nothing to do with religion. In other words, let's put aside religious belief. Let's talk about one human being to another. If you encourage a poor man to sell an organ for money, you know where that's going to lead. Then they'll sell a child into prostitution, which they're doing. Then they're going to sell themselves to the guillotine for a rich man, which has been done in historic times. You put a stop to that in a civilized world.